Hello and welcome to the first lecture which will deal with morphology. So morphology, the structure of words. So again, this is Esther giving the lecture, and this week we're going to be covering morphology, that is, the morphology of simple and complex words, and I'll come on to what simple and complex words are in a second. Segmentation, that is, how we break words into their different constituent morphemes. Morphological analysis, what we can say about different morphemes and the functions that those morphemes have, and glossing. So when we look at morphemes, we're going to be acquiring some concepts which you may have come across already, those of you who've done language before, particularly those of you who've studied other languages and those of you who've studied linguistics through English language. We will be looking at free versus bound morphemes. We'll also be covering the following concepts, so just hold them in your head and think about them. Affixes, bases, roots, stems, and the types of affix that we can have. We can have a prefix, which goes at the front of a word, a suffix, which goes at the end, an infix, which comes into the middle of a word, or a circumfix, and that's two morphemes which function together and go round a word, almost like a bracket made of words. We'll be looking at derivational morphology, inflectional morphology, and within English we can identify various types of inflectional morphology. So we'll be looking at number, that is whether something is singular or plural, so house versus houses. Case, that is, in the case of English, the case system is greatly reduced from what it used to be in Old English. So the case system now marks subject sometimes, but it can also mark possession. So if we think about something like John, the noun John and the noun bike, if we want to put those together and indicate that John is the possessor of the bike, in writing we would put apostrophe S and we would end up with John's bike. So in fact the morpheme would be Z, John's bike in speech. We could also mark tense in English, and this often presents problems for learners who don't mark tense in quite the same way. That is, our verbs will change to mark past time. So if we say something like walk, then I think we can all work out that if we want to put that into the past tense, we have to add walked. We have to add a t, and in writing that would come out as ed. So that's an example of a past tense morpheme. So we will focus very much on English in this lecture, but I will be bringing in other languages, and I certainly, if you speak other languages, even if they're conlangs, if they're constructed languages, if you're a sign language speaker, think about morphology in sign language. If you've learnt other languages, you can think about the morphology of those languages. And if your L1 is not English, please, I encourage you to think about the morphology of your L1 and how that works. And if you would like readings pertaining to any languages that you speak, do get in touch and let us know, and we can point you in the direction of some information about the languages that you speak. The more you research morphology around the world's languages, the more the concept that we're about to teach you will sink in. Let's do a little exercise then. Have a look at the phrase washable blanket. So my cats have washable blankets. It says these are pet blankets. They are washable. You can put them in the washing machine. Let's write it down. Well, it's on the slide already. Write it down on a piece of paper. You break it up now into smaller units that you think carry some meaning, some separate meaning. Okay. What do the units mean? If they have a meaning, what are they doing? And can you use any of the units you've isolated to make any other words? Okay, now do the same with blanket. Can you isolate any units of meaning within the word blanket? Well, let's think about it for a minute. When I broke washable down, I had wash, and that's fairly obvious that wash, even in the phrase washable, we have this key concept of washing going on. Okay, there's going to be some sort of washing going on. I might not want to wash the blanket now, but washing is there. Washing is encoded in the word in that four-letter and that phonemic sequence wash. Okay, there is some element of washing pertaining to that word. But we have to add able in order to say that the blanket is able to be washed. So in this case, the morpheme able affixes always after. You never say able wash. You would always say washable. The morpheme affixes after the other morpheme. So washable, likable, lovable, kickable. We can think of all sorts of ways in which the morpheme able is productive. And it means able to be kicked, able to be liked, able to be loved, able to be washed. But we only have 2 morphemes. So if we isolated any more, that's fine. And you might want to post on the forum about what you thought those were. I think most of us will have isolated wash and able. When we get on to blanket, we might spot, for example, the sequence blank. And we know that blank means bare, a bare space. And we might think, well, a blank space, a stretch of space. Perhaps that's something to do with blanket, which is a long stretch of cloth. But actually, we have a problem then, because what do we do with the et bit that we've left? Is that a meaningful morpheme? Can we say that et in this context is anything meaningful? Does it mean anything on its own? And if the answer is no, then what's it doing there? What function does it contribute to the word? We arrive at the conclusion that blanket functions as one morpheme. Although it has 2 syllables, we can't divide it into smaller meaning units. We can certainly isolate 2 syllables, blanket, but those 2 syllables have to stay together in order to encapsulate the concept of a blanket, the concept of a woolen or a man-made long stretch of warm cloth. Okay, so this is bringing us nicely to the definition of a morpheme. Just as a phoneme is the smallest sound unit, a morpheme is the smallest meaning-bearing unit. It may not be a word. So it could be a word if we look at something like cat. It's quite clear that cat pertains to the creature that says meow, usually has a tail, pointed ears, whiskers, likes to eat mice, has fur, can be kept as a pet. That happens to be a word, and it also is a morpheme. But if we look at something like unbelievable, unbelievable is a word. But you can see here that I've broken it down into several different morphemes. And we have the kind of core, if you like, the kind of core of unbelievable is the concept of belief. So it's something to do with belief, the word unbelievable. We know that we've got able added to it, so it's something that's able to be believed, believable. But then if we add un, the prefix un, in English, then we know that that does the opposite. It says not believable, not able to be believed. So you can see how we built up the morphemes when we have 3 morphemes. And even though the spelling doesn't quite match, when we take able off believe, we can see that in English we have to reconstruct an E that would be there in believe. It doesn't really matter about that, because think back to when language began. Nobody was literate. Morphemes still worked. Morphemes worked on the phonological and the psychological level. People heard the morpheme or saw the sign that was being made by the sign language user, and they understood. So literacy is kind of a side issue to morphology. But we can use these mathematical operator brackets, these curly brackets, to isolate single morphemes. And indeed I've done that, and I've shown you how to break down different morphemes within a multimorphemic unit. Okay, so a unit, a word that has more than one morpheme, multimorphemic. It's not always that easy to find morphemes though, so we've done quite well up to now. We've isolated blanket, we've isolated washable, we've isolated unbelievable, and we've split out the morphemes from those, but it's not always that easy. If we look at trees, I think we're all fairly happy that tree indicates some large kind of plant. Okay, if we want to talk semantically, what is a tree? If you close your eyes now and think about a tree, as a British English speaker, I can see an oak tree. I don't know why I can see an oak tree, but I can see an oak tree in front of me, probably because I walked past one on my way to give this lecture. I can see an oak tree. It has acorns on it, and it has large green leaves, and it's a sort of circular shape with a large brown trunk. Good. And if I think about the morpheme z, so trees, I'm aware that that's a suffix and that it marks number, and that we're then talking about more than one tree. But I can't do anything with tree. Tree itself is one morpheme, and we can't break it down into anything else. So I could break it again into phonemes, and I could end up with a phoneme cluster tr, or even t plus r plus e. But none of these parts by themselves carry meaning. Tr is a meaningless segment. E is a meaningless segment. Okay, when you see this asterisk, then the asterisk in front of these morphemic brackets, it means not a morpheme, not possible. And this denotation, this asterisk on the left-hand side, is used across linguistics from phonetic level right up to clausal level to mean a structure that's not attested. That is, an L1 speaker of the language wouldn't do that. It's not something that gets heard in the production of L1 speakers. It's possibly not possible, and we use it to mark things that are not possible. So I hope you're all happy that tr and e are not possible morphemes in English. And we're quite happy that tree is. We will come on to far more tricky morphemes shortly. Morphemes then are not equivalent to phonemes. They are not equivalent to phonemes. The morpheme is the smallest meaningful unit of language, so this is related to meaning. Phonemes are individual sounds that are the smallest units, but they are not usually meaningful. So if we think about f, o, and n, they're phonemes, but they're not morphemes. Not until we say phone, do we have a morpheme, because phone in linguistics means a sound, and in everyday life means the thing that we might ring people up on. And if we think about phone, so we might even want to go down to the phonetic level to very clear detail. And if I've got some sort of phone, if I've got maybe a very, very RP accent and I've got some kind of centered then I might just be a particularly conservative RP speaker. These things in square brackets, they're phones, but they aren't morphemes again. Now, a word, as we've seen, can be made up of one or more morphemes. Okay, so words containing one morpheme are called monomorphemic. They're also sometimes called simple words. Okay, so we can have things like cat, blanket, cabbage, chaos. We can't break those down any further. We can't break them into other morphemes. But notice again that cabbage and blanket, they have more than one syllable, but they are monomorphemic. We can't talk about... We can isolate cab, sure, out of cabbage, but what do taxis have to do with the green vegetable that we like to eat with cheese sauce or that we like to stuff with rice? Nothing. The fact that we can find cab in there is an incidental string of phonemes. It has nothing to do with the meaning entity that is that vegetable that gets eaten quite widely across the UK. Words containing more than one morpheme are called complex words or polymorphemic. Okay? Sometimes you hear multimorphemic as well, but polymorphemic is more usual in fact. So we get things like boyish. Boyish. Okay. Having a kind of quality of being a boy. That's what the ish means. And we can see that ish is a productive suffix because we can say things in English like, I'll meet you at 6-ish. Okay. Was the concert good? Well, it was good-ish. It was approximating good. Approximating 6 o'clock, I will meet you. Having the approximate qualities of a boy. Okay, and in fact, we don't tend to say that boys are boyish. We tend to say that girls are boyish if they climb trees or have short hair or any other bewildering number of stereotypes pertaining to things that girls, maybe people think girls shouldn't be. Okay, and we can go on. We can add more morphemes. So we can talk about boyishness. You're already beginning to see ness does something. So if we have the word boyish, that's an adjective. And if we add ness, just think about it. What sound, what word class do we get if we do that? If we add ness to things, kindness, unkindness, happiness. Ness is a very English, it goes right back to Anglo-Saxon. Ness is a noun-making suffix. So it means the quality of boyish, okay? It makes a noun out of the adjective boyish. How do we go about identifying morphemes then? Well, we started to do it on an ad hoc basis already because we started to look at things and break them up. And actually what native speakers do tend to do, what L1 speakers do tend to do is try to isolate the syllables. They also try to pick out meaning. So when we looked at washable, I think all of us, L1, L2, L3 speakers, we all sort of zoned in on wash. And we thought, well, it must be something to do with washing because it's got the word wash in it. And that's one way to do it. So we might go towards the main meaning cluster in those in a word. How did we do it? What were we looking for? And I would suggest that we were looking for units that have the same form and meaning across different words. So if you think back to washable, what can I do with the morpheme wash? I can say washable, washing, washed, washes. He washes himself every day. Washcloth. I have other compounds. I can have, let me see, washerwoman. I can have washer. Okay, someone who washes. So I can look across different words and I can isolate the same unit. And in all of those units, washer, a person who does the washing, washcloth, I had this element of wash which pertains to the task of making things clean with soap and water. So a morpheme then is a sound plus a meaningful unit in spoken language. course, in sign language, it will be a gesture, which pertains to a set of meanings, a fixed set of meanings. We can have morphemes that take the same form but have a different meaning, and let me show you what I mean. So if we look at singer, in singer we've got two morphemes. We've got sing, and we've also got what we call the agentive suffix Okay, we've just been talking about washer woman, like in The Wind in the Willows when Toad goes to be a washerwoman. Okay, in this kind of suffix, agentive means that it transforms the verb into a noun, and it does that by saying means the one who sings, singer. There's an act of singing, and the singer is the person doing the singing. Okay, the singer is the one doing the singing, just as the washer is the one doing the washing. Doesn't always work like that, though. Can work in different ways. If we look at tall and add then I think you can see that we're not saying that means tall is the one who is doing the talling, or the one who is being tall. That's no good. In this case, it's what we call a comparative suffix. Is used to mark more tall, essentially. It's like saying more tall. It's like tall plus, semantically. So we've got the same form, but they are in fact different meanings, different morphemes. They happen to take the same surface form, but their meaning is different. So we've got two different morphemes there. We can have the reverse problem. You've got a different form, but with a same or a similar meaning. Have a look again at singer, and we agreed that it was an agentive suffix, so it meant the one who sings. If we look at something like songster, okay, and that's used in kind of tongue-in-cheek, maybe highbrow music publications now, but actually it used to be used very widely across the north of England. So if you think about things like spinster, spinster is the one who spins. If we think about sangster, that's just a Scots surname for a singer. It's the equivalent of the English singer. So it used to be used much more productively. Can you think of any other stirs? Okay, I can't think of any other stirs right now, but there are other stirs. It's a less productive morpheme in present-day English, though it is much more productive in the north of England. But it means the same thing. It's agentive, the one who sings. Okay, songster, sangster, these are the one who sings. They're the same form, not the same. So we can have the same form, and they can be different morphemes, or we can have different form, the same morpheme meaning. We can then have a problem that we have the same form, but they aren't in fact morphemes. So if we think about finger, we would be way out of our depth if we isolated fing and okay? We do sometimes hear fing, because people pronounce thing as fing, so that is a morpheme, but that means an entity, a thing. You've dropped that thing on the floor that you were reading, you've dropped that thing on the floor. We never spell it as fing in standard English, so that's one clue. And we can't talk about finging. You know, what's the verb to fing? I finged it down the stairs. You know, I've finged that now. He was finging when I turned up. This is not a verb. It's a non-verb. So we would be erroneous to isolate just because we can see at the end, just to isolate that as an agentive or a comparative suffix. It's not. Finger is one morpheme. Compare sing and singer, and it doesn't work. And similarly, a monster is not one who mons, okay? A monster is not one who mons, okay? We can't talk about that because there is no verb to mon, okay? There is no verb to mon in standard English. But we might want to compare it with young and youngster, or spin and spinster, and then that's no good, is it? That's not. Okay. Moving on then, how do we go on presenting morphemes in analysis? I've shown you the curly brackets that we sometimes use to separate them out, and you will see that in a lot of your readings. But as you present them, you're going to use italics. Okay, so for the original morpheme, you're going to use italics. Italics show that it's the language form. So for example, in English we would say dog is monomorphemic, cat is monomorphemic. These are both terms for pets. Okay. The Russian word runka for hand is monomorphemic. Because we're quoting Russian, we put the original language in italics, and we then gloss, and we gloss with single quotes. So you can see that I've glossed, for non-Russian speakers who don't know what runka means, I've put hand in a gloss. So we use these single quotes for translations, and they are called glosses. You will come across this. Gloss is a kind of translation or explanation, and it comes from the Greek glossa, which meant originally tongue, which came to mean language. So, let me just go back a second and just clarify. You saw the translation in single quotes. Glosses are when we require a more detailed explanation. So they're allied to translations, but we need glosses across long stretches of polymorphemic information, okay? If we have a very long word, we're going to need an explanation of what all the morphemes in that word are doing. If we have a sentence, we're going to need an explanation of what all the morphemes in that sentence are doing. And this becomes particularly important if we think that our readers will have no access to that language. So you can get away with perhaps quoting a few French words if you think that your audience might understand them, and you can provide your own translation. If you're going to quote a language that is less widely known in the country you're writing in, you have to provide a comprehensive gloss, and you must make sure it's accurate. So let's have a look at Mohawk, Kanyen Keha, okay, which is a language of Canada. Now, I don't know if we have any Mohawk speakers among us. I have met Mohawk speakers, but I don't think we have any in our cohort. But it is possible for us to look, with the help of other Mohawk speakers, at the morphology of Mohawk. So what we can do is we can look at the word, and you've got the word, as I told you, in italics. We can then break it down into different morphemes. We've got the morpheme te, ni, nons, ishak, okay, and then ha. And what we need is the gloss, and it says you and I, so te, ni, nons, ishak, to house, seek, go and, okay, and we end up with te, ni, nons, ishak, ha, and we end up with these morphemes. So you and I, to, house, seek, go, and. Okay, so somehow in Mohawk, you and I is encoded as te, to is encoded as ni, nons is encoded as house, seek, go is ishak, and comes at the end and is ha. And the translation in English, the way that we would put this in English, is let's go and look for the house. So if you look at the levels again, in italics we've given you how the sentence was spoken. We've quoted the original Mohawk. In 2, we've given the separate morphemes, and they don't always correspond to the kind of ways that we would stack morphemes up in our own language. So Mohawk tends to stick morphemes together. Okay, we tend to stick a few morphemes together. So something like singer, okay, we put the morphemes together there. Mohawk sticks far more morphemes together, and so the concept of a sentence in Mohawk becomes slightly different, but we don't need to worry about that just now. We still isolate the separate morphemes because what we're looking for is different meanings. We then put a gloss on, so we explain what each of the morphemes is doing, and you can see we've isolated you and I, te. So there's clearly some sort of pronoun which means you and me. Why wouldn't there be? That's fine, you and I. Ni is to, nons is house, ishak means both seek and go, right? And then and, ha. And the ha goes on the end. So we've isolated the morphemes, we've glossed what they mean, and we've given then a sort of paraphrase meaning in our own language for ease of reading. So we have 4 levels. So I want you to refer to this example when you're doing your assessments, because we want you to set out your glosses like this. And we want you to clearly set out glosses like this. Let's have some more definitions of a morpheme just to really interrogate that definition and make sure that we understand it's the smallest meaning unit. Yule says it's not just the smallest meaning unit, it can be the smallest unit of grammatical function. Well, okay, we'll come on to that. So if we think of something like I sing, she sings, we have to have the z in English. We have to make she agree with the verb. We call it agreement, verb concord. We have to have this z in standard English in the 3rd person singular. So it has a grammatical function, but I think Yule's arguing that that function is arguably less important. We'll come on to that in a minute. Importance. Can we leave out any morphemes? Are some morphemes less important than others? Are some morphemes less crucial? Do they behave differently? Baker and Hengeveld say that they're the smallest identifiable components of a word that carry meaning. Well, I would say that that's exactly the same as saying smallest meaning unit, but it's another definition. So you can think about those. But Yule has introduced this idea, notice, that there might be that grammatical morphemes might be somehow less carrying of meaning, or that their meaning is more fixed. And we'll come back to that, so hold that idea in your head. Okay, let's have a pause for a minute. So I talked about Yule's definition of morphemes and how he isolated grammatical morphemes, and we can move on from that and start to think about the issue of which morphemes are perhaps more meaningful. And we can divide morphemes into free morphemes and bound morphemes. within bound morphemes, we can talk about inflectional and derivational morphemes. So hold those definitions in your head. We can talk about free morphemes. We can also divide the category of bound morphemes into inflectional and derivational. Now, free morphemes are relatively easy. When we were looking at washable, we started to isolate the segment wash as a morpheme because we made analogies with washcloth, with washing, I'm washing, he's washed, washing liquid. We could see the concept of wash, I think. And wash can stand alone as an independent word, right? If we look up wash in the dictionary, it will say to us verb, to clean with soap and water. They can stand alone as independent words. So I can say things like wash yourself or wash. There's a hint for you, wash. And it's a verb. So we get things like book, the numeral to, the verb to like. We can get the, if you like, the marker not. We can have the verb go, the verb run. And it's quite clear to us that these are independent words. They stand on their own. Yeah? Bound morphemes never occur as words on their own. So if we think about singer, yes, we hear the segment but that's a different meaning morpheme. Okay, it means I am uncertain. It's not the agentive morpheme, the one who sings. That doesn't occur on its own. In a similar way, he washed himself. We never get that t morpheme, the ed in spelling. We never get that standing on its own. We don't get un in unbelievable or unwashable. We don't get re from replay. We don't get ly from quickly. We don't get those standing as words on their own, so they are bound to other morphemes. They must be with a free morpheme to make sense, to make full sense. They have a meaning property. We've identified as an agentive suffix, one who washes, one who sings, one who walks. We've identified ud or t as a past tense suffix, so he washed, he laughed, he jumped. We've identified un as some kind of oppositional suffix, so unlikable, unpleasant. Yeah? But they don't occur on their own. They certainly do carry meaning, but it's a much more fixed meaning, and it occurs only in conjunction with another free morpheme. So free and bound morphemes, so far so good. Although when we come to put this into practice in the seminars, you will come across some candidates that you will puzzle over. So nothing, as with everything in linguistics, nothing is that simple. But this is a good rule that we can have free and bound morphemes, that those are robust categories to talk about. If we're talking about bound morphemes a little more then, why do we have the hyphen? Why have I written a hyphen at the start of these bound morphemes? This agentive suffix, singer, washer. This ed for he laughed, he jumped. Why is there a hyphen after un, so unpleasant, unlikable? The hyphen indicates that a morpheme is bound, and then it must attach to something else. And the position of the hyphen tells us where the bound morpheme attaches. So you can see that in un, that the hyphen comes at the end, and that tells you in turn that un in English is a prefix. There are languages that put the negative at the end. But in our language, a negation of an adverb, or a negation of an adjective, so likable, unlikable, they go at the start. Likewise, the past tense morpheme always goes to the end. It affixes on the end. And we'll see in a minute that it's not like that across all languages. But in the language we're talking about, in English, present-day English, the ed, the walked, the t phoneme, goes at the end. Now, we can also talk about affixes and bases. Okay? An affix is a bound morpheme that attaches to a base, and it modifies its meaning in some way. This is what we've just been talking about. So we've talked our way through unlikable. In a similar way, we could talk about the adjective sure. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And we could say, I'm unsure about this morphology business. Okay, I don't know. We put an affix on a base. So sure is functioning as a base. It's a free morpheme, but it's functioning as a base, the form to which we attach the affix. Okay. Similarly, we can talk about shy as an adjective. And if you want to say that somebody did something in a shy manner, then we would turn it into an adverb. So he shyly smiled, okay, or shyly he smiled, yes? Then we'd put ly at the end of shyly. And I'll use the phonetics. We would say shyly, so it would be li. And in spelling it's ly. Similarly, if we have the verb love, then we can say loving. Let's say McDonald's advert, I'm loving it, yeah? Or you can use it as an adjective. He's a loving dog. He's a very nice dog, a kind dog. Okay, he's a loving pet to have. And in all of these, the bits that are not bold are the base, okay? So in the first set of examples, I bolded up the affixes, and you can see affixes can come at the start or at the end in English. The base, so the form to which the affix is attached, I've then put in bold at the bottom. So we can see that sure, the adjective, is a base. Shy, the adjective, is a base for building the adverb. Love, the verb, is a base for building progressive forms of the verb, so adding an aspect marker. Yeah, so I am loving my Big Mac. He is a loving dog. We can build an adjective from it. So we add these affixes to these bases. So affixes and bases we will touch on again in the seminar when we meet together, and also in the module activities. And we will practice this. There'll be a real opportunity for you to practice. Now, returning to the concept of a base. Bases can be roots or stems. So the things that we attach our affixes to, they can be roots or they could be stems. So a root is the central part of a complex word. Every word has a root as its core. Okay, so every word will have a root. The root conveys the main meaning of the word, and it's not analysable into anything smaller. The root is what we're left with if we remove all affixes. So it's monomorphemic usually, okay? So if we look at something like loving, okay, then we end up with love. Okay, the root is not reducible to anything else. Are we happy that love is there in loving? The spelling alters, but again, remember that literacy is a red herring when we're analysing morphology. What we are looking for is the phonological segments which carry that meaning, which become enshrined into morphemes. So love is the action of caring deeply about something or someone. Okay, and we can have love as a root, and we can add ing in English, and that means the action of love. Okay, continuously love. Good. So each word has a root as its core. And each word, some words may just be roots. So if we think about cat again, it only has a root. Cat is the whole meaning of that word, the creature with the tail that meows, that has pointy ears, that eats mice. Okay, we can't analyse it into smaller parts. So in that case, it's a root, and it's a base, and it's a free morpheme. Okay. Let's have a look then. We've looked at some prefixes and suffixes. Let's have a look at what languages around the world can do, because they can do some pretty different things. So in terms of languages, we call it typology, the sort of language that it is, what it does. And we can sometimes, we'll come to this much later next term, we will start comparing languages on the basis of their typology. So are they similar? Are they similar in the way that they have their words ordered? Are they similar in the way that they treat their morphemes? So in English, we've seen that we have prefixes and suffixes. We can have undo, or we can have dancing. Now, Ilocano, which is a language spoken in the Philippines, has a prefix taga. Okay, so let's have a look at how it patterns. So, Amianan means north. Taga Amianan, someone who comes from the north. And once we know this, we don't even have to know any Ilocano to know how this might work. So if I give you the term Abagatan, which is south, then you can just put on this prefix, taga, and it will mean one who comes from the south. If we look at the word ili, then we can add taga, and it means from town. So this time it's used as a sort of adverbial, coming from the town. If we have America, which is Ilocano for America, and we add taga America, that means one who is from America. So it is the it's the suffix to denote, it's the prefix, I'm sorry, to denote somebody from that place. Bantay means mountain, taga Bantay, from the mountains. So it's very productive, we can see clearly how it works, and it's a prefix. What's interesting is that from doesn't behave like that in English. From is a free morpheme and doesn't get treated as a prefix in that sense. But it's just another example of how languages around the world use the same categories of grammar that we do, but perhaps slightly differently. Okay, let's have another look at one. And I've put you a map of actually where Ilocano is spoken, so in the north of the Philippines, just so you can see. Because we give a lot of examples, but it would be lovely to go and visit all these places, wouldn't it, and meet all these speakers, but we rarely do get to, although you may well have encountered Ilocano speakers. So if we look down the list, we've got a lot of verbs: to grind, to strain, to wrap, to weigh, giling, sagat, balkot, timbeng. And what we notice is that what we talked about, the agentive suffix, so the thing that does that task, yeah, the wrapper, the grinder, the strainer, the weigher, and we would translate that in English as the scales, actually. We don't translate it as the weigher, but it's clear that it does that job, it weighs, yeah? Is the suffix an. So gilling, if we know that grind is gilling, then gilling an must be grinder, so like a pepper grinder. If we know that sagat is to strain, then we know that sagatan is the thing that you need to get out of the sink if you want to strain your rice when you've cooked it, although you shouldn't have lots of excess water, but perhaps to strain your pasta, yeah? If we know that to wrap is balkot, then we know that balkotan is the cloth that you wrap your sandwiches in. So again, it's a very productive suffix. It's quite clear to see how it functions, and it goes on the end of the verb. So in this case, it does correlate completely with English, but that's coincidental. Okay, there are lots of ways of doing this, and not all languages do what English and Ilocano do. There are other ways of marking this agentive action, the thing that does the grinding, the thing that does the straining. What about infixes then? Infixes in English are really quite restricted. They are only used in creative and joking language. So we get things like abso-flippin'-lutely. We get fan-fucking-tastic. And they often violate traditional morpheme structure. So we can talk a little bit about that in the seminar, perhaps. In English, they are severely restricted, and they tend to be only used in creative, joking, and sometimes rude language. So I can't think of any examples that aren't flipping or effing or bloody. And they tend to be put in these intensifying adjectives. They're much more productive in Ilocano, so infixing is used as a really, really robust strategy. So if you want to say that something's infested with something, okay, in Ilocano, you can see and you can try to pick out for yourself the strategy. If you look down the words kuton, ngilo, kuto, and gayaman, okay, and you can see that kiin uton, inilo, kin uto, and gin ayaman, you can see what's happened. The rule is that we take the first consonant, the onset consonant, so ng functions as a consonant in Ilocano, and after that we put this infix in. And it goes from meaning the creature to infested with the creatures. So it's an infix. And we can see that it's an infix because it goes in the middle of the morpheme. So it actually goes into the morpheme, into that free morpheme. So this is a structure that we're not so familiar with in English, and it might look a bit peculiar to you, but it certainly patterns very clearly across these four creatures. And yes, you can get food infested with these things. You can get wounds infested with these things. You can get your garden infested with ants. So this is a very productive strategy in Ilocano, which it wasn't in English. So infixes. And we might also want to look at circumfixes. Now, they're not productive anymore in English, but they used to be. In Old English, circumfixes certainly existed. They are, almost imagine them as an affix that is in two parts, but you must have two parts for it to make sense. One will go at the start and one will go at the end of the free word. So they wrap around the root. Part of the morpheme goes on each side of the word at the same time. They have to function together. If you omit one, you haven't properly produced the word, and speakers won't understand you. So if we look at sagen in German, the verb to say, and we want to make the past participle of sagen, so ich habe gesagt, I have said. Said, as the past participle in German, has to have ge and t. So you have to have the ge marker to mark the past participle, but you also have to have the t. If you said gesagt or sagt, that doesn't work. You haven't clearly marked the past participle, I have said. So you have to have the ge plus the t. And you can see that I've given you the circumfix, and it's two little morphemes, and they function together almost like brackets round the root. Ilocano also has circumfixes, so it has pag and n, pagen. So ledang is sad, and pag ledangen is to make sad. Okay, so pagen is kind of causative, to cause to be sad. Urai is to wait, so pag urai en is to make wait. And if I give you ragsak, then you can work out for yourself without looking at the slides that pag ragsaken must mean to make happy. So it uses it in a rather different way to German. German is using it to mark past and to mark aspect, something that's said, done, finished. Ilocano is using its circumfix in a different way, but it functions in exactly the same way. So one bit at the start of the root and one bit at the end of the root, and you must have both parts. However, beware, cave. I'm not sure why I put the Latin up there as well, but you can start to think about different languages and identifying morphemes across languages, actually, because there's a lot of Latin in English. And it leads to some discussions that you can have in your seminar about when a morpheme is no longer a morpheme and when speakers no longer recognise something as a morpheme. Okay, and we can start to think about things like telephone. Do speakers recognise tele as a morpheme, or is it no longer a functioning morpheme in English? Okay, it comes from the Greek for distance, so distant sound. Would we identify telephone as one morpheme or two? And you can start to talk about that in your seminars. If two suffixes follow a root, the inner one is not an infix. So we can look at a word like artfulness, which is sort of the quality of being crafty. Yes, art, full, so you're full of arts, and ness, the quality of being full of art. Okay, the quality of being full of crafty, being devious, perhaps. Artfulness. Artfulness is deviousness. So if we've got two suffixes after a root, art, manner, okay, craft, full, full of crafts, full of arts, ness, the entity that is full of crafts, that doesn't mean that full is an infix, okay? Full is also a suffix. Full is doing something else. It's not an infix. Similarly, if we've got two prefixes in front of a root, that doesn't make the inner one an infix. So unpremeditated, you can't say that unpremeditated, that the pre is an infix. It's not. Think about what meditated means. Meditated means thought out, planned. Premeditated, what does pre mean? Well, if we talk about pre-cooked, we know that it's from Latin and it means before. Okay, so before, thought out before. So we can talk about unpremeditated crimes. Crimes that were not thought out before, and the un does the not bit, and the pre does the before bit, and the meditated is the thought out. That does not mean that pre is functioning as an infix. Okay, infixes occur inside a morpheme. They actually go into the internal structure of a free morpheme. Similarly, if a prefix and a suffix go round a root, this doesn't make a circumfix. So inputs, it's quite easy to prove this, because if we talk about inputs, we've had lots of inputs for this meeting. Okay, I had an unforgettable day. Well, I can have a forgettable day. So un and able are not functioning together round forget. They're doing two different jobs. In and puts, the in and the ser are doing two different jobs. Input, the in functions with put to say what you've put into the meeting, and the ser tells you that there was more than one thing that you put into the meeting. Forget is the quality of not remembering something. Able, being able to not remember something. Un, not being able to not remember something, but they can be split apart. Whereas the two parts of a circumfix must function as one and they cannot operate alone. So I hope that's clarified that a little bit more. Again, we can practice this. There will be definitely some resources on Moodle this week for you to practice, and also some forum posts about that. Okay, not too much reading then, but really you should choose two or more of these. Particularly Haspel Math is good. Brabber, Cummings and Morrish is a fairly easy introduction, so the second from the bottom. And Yule is an easy introduction too, and it's good to read more than one because you will come across slight differences in terminology. You will also find that different linguists, so Martin Haspel Math, for example, frequently quotes German, Natalie Brabber quotes Dutch, Yule quotes much more widely from across the world's languages, Japanese, Chinese, Indonesian languages, and it's really good to get a good broad grasp of what different languages in the world do, and how their morphology is put together, and all the commonalities but also the differences. So do choose more than one reading for this week. Thank you for listening. Do remember to check Moodle for the activities for this week and to take part in any forum posts that we've asked you to take part in. And any questions, do email me, so esther.asprey@warwick.ac.uk. Thank you.